Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something really interesting. The AG-18. It's this small, super affordable Soviet camera from the 80s.
Right, and it's packed with some, well, let's call them quirks.
Definitely quirks. We're using an excerpt from the Soviet Snapshots podcast, Roman's show, as our main source here. And our mission is basically to unpack this little camera for you.
And the hook is pretty compelling, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a camera that cost about the same as maybe a dinner out for two nowadays.
Yeah, like 19 rubles back then. Wildly cheap. Yet it wasn't just a toy. It had some real photographic ideas behind it.
Absolutely. It says a lot about accessibility. You know, making photography available to way more people than, say, a high-end Zenit might have.
It really does. It makes you think about what role photography played in everyday Soviet life when a tool like this was around.
Well, I think that's part of the broader context, isn't it? The Soviet system often prioritized practical tools for the masses over maybe cutting-edge tech for just a few.
And the AG-18 fits that perfectly.
It really seems to. A simple, functional tool.
Okay, so the specifics. It was made in the 1980s by Belomo. That's the big Belarusian optical conglomerate.
Right, and specifically by the MMZ and Veliko factories, which were part of Zenit. Apparently, they even had different logos depending on which factory made them.
That's a neat little detail. Shows maybe some internal identity or something.
Could be. Or just how Soviet industry was structured.
And that price, 19 rubles, which Roman figured was about $31, maybe $32 US back in 1987.
Incredible value, really.
And its core design idea was scale focus, half frame. Those are the key terms.
Yeah, let's break those down. Scale focus basically means guesswork.
Well, educated guesswork, maybe.
Right. You estimate the distance to your subject. Is it close, medium, far?
Mm-hmm.
And set the lens accordingly. No autofocus, no rangefinder. You had to engage with it.
Made you think more about the shot, I suppose.
Definitely. Now, the half-frame part, that's where it gets really distinctive.
Okay, explain that. What does half frame actually mean?
So think about a standard 35mm film frame. It's normally 36 millimeters wide by 24 millimeters high.
Right, the standard rectangle we all know.
Exactly. A half-frame camera, like the AGAT-18, cuts that in half. It uses the same film, but each picture is only 24 millimeters high by 18 millimeters wide. So portrait orientation, basically.
Ah, okay. So you turn the camera sideways for a landscape shot.
Precisely. And the huge advantage,
You get more pictures.
twice as many. A standard 36 exposure roll suddenly becomes a 72 exposure roll.
Wow, 72 shots. That's a massive difference.
Huge. Think about traveling or documenting family events, especially when film developing weren't free. It really stretched your budget.
No kidding. But there had to be downsides, right? You can't just double your photos for free.
Well, the main one was the print format. Photo labs were all set up for the standard 36 by 24 millimeter.
So they wouldn't know what to do with these skinny 24 by 18 millimeter negatives.
Pretty much. You might get prints cropped weirdly, or maybe just confused looks from the person at the photo counter. It wasn't the standard.
I can just imagine that conversation. What are these? So, okay, unusual prints, but tons of photos. Let's talk lens. It had a fixed Instar 104, 28 millimeter f2.8.
Right. Now, 28 millimeters sounds quite wide angle on a regular 35 millimeter camera.
Yeah, it does.
But because the AJ-18 sensor, the film frame is smaller, that 28 millimeter lens gives you a field of view that's actually closer to a 50 millimeter lens on full frame.
The normal lens perspective, like what your eye sees.
Kind of, yeah. More focused than a true wide angle. As for quality, the Industar lenses, Soviet lenses generally, could be surprisingly good, often based on older German design.
I sense a but coming.
Soviet quality control in the 80s could be variable, let's say that.
Variable.
Roman from the Source podcast put it brilliantly. He said you might get sharpness like a Rembrandt, or maybe something softer, more like a Picasso, especially towards the edges of the frame.
Small chuckle. Yeah, okay, so a bit of a lottery in terms of sharpness. Adds to the character, maybe.
Or frustration, depending on the day. It's part of the charm, looking back.
So how about actually using it, setting it up for a shot? You mentioned scale focus.
Right, so focus is by guessing distance. And aperture, that's how much light the lens lets in, was set using little weather icons.
Icons, like a sun and a cloud.
Exactly. Sunny day, cloudy day, maybe indoors with flash. Very simple, meant for anyone to pick up and use without understanding f-stops.
Seems straightforward. But I read the shutter speed and aperture were linked somehow.
They were interlocked. So when you chose the sunny icon, for example, the camera would automatically select a combination of a small aperture, like f11 or f16, and a fast shutter speed,
Ah,
And
okay.
if you chose the cloudy icon, it would open the aperture more and slow the shutter speed down.
So you couldn't choose them independently. You couldn't decide, I want a fast shutter and a wide aperture for creative effect.
Nope. The camera made that basic exposure decision for you based on the icon you picked. It limited your creative options to quite a bit compared to a manual camera. No tweaking for depth of field or motion blur easily. You needed a separate light meter for real control.
Right, so it was really about point-and-shoot simplicity for the conditions.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Capture the moment. Don't worry too much about the settings.
And then there was the ISO setting for the film speed, ASA 16 to 250, I think.
Yeah, that covered the common film sensitivities back then. But apparently, actually turning that ISO ring could be a workout.
A workout.
Roman joked it might have been a secret national fitness initiative. They could be really stiff and difficult to adjust.
Okay, that's pretty funny. So a potentially stubborn ISO ring. What about just getting the film in and out?
Ah, yes. Film handling had its own personality.
Oh, dear.
The wheel you used to wind the film on between shots was also the shutter button. You press it down to take the picture, then turn it to advance.
Okay.
But the thing is, you couldn't wind that wheel unless there was film loaded and engaged with sprockets. You couldn't just dry fire it easily.
So you couldn't test the shutter without film?
Not easily, no. And the loading process itself is described as, well, potentially fiddly, not the smoothest.
And didn't the body come in two parts or something?
It did. The main body and the back, they clipped together. But you had to make sure they lined up perfectly.
Why? What happens if they don't?
Light leaks. If there was even a tiny gap where the two halves met, light could creep in and fog your film. Ruin your pictures.
Yikes. Okay, so careful loading and closing were essential.
Absolutely. Another little challenge for the user.
Right. So assuming you've navigated the loading, closed it tight, wrestled the ISO ring, what's the view like when you look through it?
The viewfinder was actually meant to be quite large and bright, which is a definite plus. Makes composing easier.
That's good.
And it had parallax correction marks, little lines to help you frame close-up shots accurately. Because what you see through the viewfinder isn't exactly what the lens sees up close.
Right. The viewpoint is slightly different, so those marks help compensate. Useful.
Very useful for close-ups, yeah.
Did it have a flash connection?
It did, yeah. A standard hot shoe on top, so you could attach an external flash.
Another.
Well, the design of the hot shoe was apparently a bit recessed, set back into the body slightly.
And that caused problems.
It could make it difficult or even impossible to mount some modern, maybe bulkier electronic flash units securely. They just wouldn't fit or connect properly.
Huh. So again, kind of pushing you towards using available light, simpler shooting.
Seems that way.
Huh?
It wasn't really geared towards complex flash photography, more for grabbing snapshots on the go.
Which fits the whole affordable, accessible vibe. How did it actually feel? The build quality?
Is made of plastic. Textured plastic, which probably helped with grip and definitely kept the cost down.
Lightweight, I imagine.
Yeah, very light. Roman described it as durable enough for travel, toss it in the bag. But probably not something you'd want to drop.
Especially not from a moving Lada, as he joked.
Exactly. Don't test its limits that far. It's plastic after all.
But what's really quite significant, historically speaking, is that the AGAT-18 wasn't just a copy of some Western camera.
That's a crucial point. So much Soviet photo gear, cameras like the Zorky or FED, were essentially copies or developments of German Leica or Contax designs.
But the AG-18 was different.
It was an original Soviet design, created from the ground up, seemingly, to meet those goals of simplicity, affordability, and that unique half-frame format. That makes it stand out.
It really does. It shows some genuine domestic innovation in camera design.
Definitely. A unique approach for its time and place.
And it clearly resonated because the production numbers are huge.
Astronomical, almost.
Yeah.
Over 1.4 million units made just between 1983 and 1991.
Wow.
And then even after the Soviet Union collapsed, they made another, 197,000 or so under the Leica brand.
That's over 1.6 million cameras in total. Just incredible number.
It really tells you how popular and widespread this little camera must have been. Think of all the memories captured on those millions of age. It's quite something.
It really is a fun, significant piece of photographic history.
Absolutely.
So wrapping this all together, the AJ-18, it kind of represents this moment, this era of accessible creativity in the Soviet Union, wouldn't you say?
I think that's fair. It offered this unique half-frame way of shooting, and the experience was, well, simple. Sometimes maybe too simple or challenging, but ultimately straightforward.
It wasn't about pixel peeping perfection or tons of features.
Not at all. It was about getting a camera into people's hands, giving them a tool to document their lives, their families, their world within the economic and technical constraints they had. It's more than just plastic and glass. It's a bit of cultural history.
And for you, the listener, looking at the AGA-18 gives you this window into Soviet-era design thinking, the ingenuity, but also the limitations.
Yeah, it's a concrete example of how people find ways to be creative, even when the tools aren't perfect or cutting edge. It's quirks, it's low price. That's what made photography possible for so many more people there.
Have you ever really stopped to think about how just making something affordable, like a basic camera, can fundamentally change how a society sees itself or remembers its past?
It's a powerful idea, isn't it? Democratizing technology. Even something seemingly small like the AGAT-18. It enabled the creation of countless personal archives, personal histories.
What kind of stories get told when more people have the tools? What records get kept? It's fascinating.
And those little details we talked about, the ones from Roman's podcast, they stick with you, don't they?
Totally. The idea of getting a Picasso instead of a Rembrandt, depending on the day's quality control.
Or needing, superhuman strength just to turn the ISO dial.
It paints such a vivid picture. And knowing over 1.6 million were made just drives home how much of an impact it must have had.
It leads to a final thought, maybe. Are we today maybe overlooking some half-frame perspectives?
What do you mean by that?
Well, we're often so focused on the latest, most complex, feature-packed cameras or technologies. Are we maybe missing the value in simplicity and accessibility? The kind of creativity that comes from working with limitations, like the AGAT-18 forced you to do.
Is there a benefit to sometimes having fewer choices, simpler tools? Does that focus you in a different way?
Perhaps. Maybe embracing constraints can lead to unexpected or more essential kinds of expression. What unique viewpoints are we missing by always reaching for the most complicated option available?
That's definitely something to mull over. What half-frame views might we be ignoring in other parts of our lives, too?
Well, thanks for exploring the quirky world of the AGA-18 with us today.
Always fascinating to look at these less famous bits of tech history.
Absolutely. Until our next deep dive, keep those perspectives wide open. Or maybe even half frame.